But even imagine if you could sell a TV show as an NFT.
Hmm.
And the way that those smart contracts, and again, this stuff isn't being necessarily done right now, but it's the same idea, it's the same concept of selling a television show and being attached to that as a creator and a creative, and having it not necessarily all taken from you in those same ways. It can become more collaborative, and the people who are involved can all be a part of that greater picture and the greater pie, both in the creative but also financially,
Sure.
and make sure that the creators get paid.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting to think about, like, what an NFT TV show looks like. Welcome back to another episode of Lights Camera Crypto, the podcast exploring all things entertainment and Web3. I'm your host, Stephen Ladden, and this week our guest is Ben Silverman. Ben is a Web3 strategist. He's a longtime friend and such a smart guy. He and I started our entertainment careers back at Creative Artists Agency many moons ago. And as Ben explains in this episode, CAA was the launch pad for him to understand and see trends within entertainment and even the skill set to pick up on those trends. And so what he explains in this episode is the lay of the land currently for entertainment and Web3 and where things are poised to go in the future, and how his background in traditional film and television has helped inform being able to see these trends and being able to see where the industry is headed and what we can expect from both a financing side of things and from the art. Let's dive in. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Ben, we have known each other for some time, and back in our entertainment days, I know sort of the high level beats of how you initially got into entertainment, but maybe share for those who don't know sort of how you got into the industry, what your thoughts were on it growing up, how you became part of the beast. How did it all start?
That's a large question.
It is.
Well, I think we've known each other for about 20 years now, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
We started back at CAA together back in the day.
That's right.
And that's, I've always been a filmmaker, focused really on directing and producing film and television. Ultimately, I came out and moved to Los Angeles about 2002 and ended up working at the agency, CAA, for about 5 years. Was in the television packaging department there, where I learned pretty much the ins and outs, as one does, of the TV and film worlds. Ended up going to work for a feature director, where I really was much more focused on developing feature films and part of his commercial advertising world as well, which led me into, I've got a lot of these kind of pivots that happened in my life, but ended up getting the advertising and brand background from that situation, and ended up opening my own company, and had that for about 8.5 years, or give or take, where we were focusing much more on VFX, asset creation, commercials, digital media, really kind of taking everything that I had done in the past and just making a ton of content. And at that point, I ended up taking a different path and moving away from that world, and I kind of fell in a really organic way to the whole NFT world and Web3, which, it's funny because in the entertainment industry and people aren't quite adapting to those terms yet, like NFT and metaverse and cryptocurrency, using all of this language, which I think will actually change as people adopt. I think the language will change. I think what they are will always remain the same. But it's
Mm.
funny, I say NFT and I try not to, because when I do, people kind of shy away in a funny way. I don't know if you've had that experience yet.
It's definitely been a some question marks for sure when NFTs and crypto and words of that nature are brought into conversation. But I do think the resounding sort of feeling amongst folks like yourself and uh, both creators and executives on either side of the coin that Web3 crypto, that the space is very much here to stay and isn't going away and is the future. But in terms of future, I'm curious, did you ever envision yourself, did young Ben ever envision himself at the intersection of entertainment and sort of Web3 as you are now?
No. I don't know how I could, because it just got, it's just being created. It's funny, people ask me all the time on what exactly is it, and where is it going to go, and how is it going to be. But ultimately, we're talking about it right now, and especially, as we speak today, 2022 October, it's being imagined. All the biggest companies are jumping in, all the biggest entertainment firms, everybody. I'm having conversations with different types of management companies, agencies, network studios, different forms of people being interested and excited. A lot of people also being, I'm sure what people have heard back in, say like 1999, 2000, oh, this is just a blip and it's going to go away. And I just don't think people understand what that even means yet.
Sure. In the ultimate, it's akin to, you could say, to one big creative project in some ways.
Absolutely.
And to that end, how how impactful, what does your background in filmmaking and in commercials, like, and having your own company, how does that inform your understanding of the space, and how did it help you get into it?
Well, I guess to start, I ended up producing a good amount of NFTs and digital content, because if you think about, the beginning of what these were, you have these pieces of art, whether it's, it was just digital artwork, or if it was CGI assets. I mean, ultimately, CG and digital assets are what's going to be at the base of a lot of these metaverse or augmented reality or virtual reality experiences. But it's a lot bigger than that. Uh, you know, so people who come from the world that I come from, and that you have come from in your past also, you know, it is almost the same thing, except it's just utilizing different tools
Mm.
to kind of move forward. Like, I look at them like they're Web3 tools, they're blockchain tools, but ultimately the story is really where it all begins. And it's creating a story, finding the backing, finding your community, finding how you engage with a community, which is all entertainment really is anyway. It's creating these stories and these worlds and engaging a community, and all the Web3 metaverse, whatever you want to call it, that whole universe is really all about community and engagement, and sharing these experiences together.
Totally. And so what it sounds like you're saying then is, really, it's your background in storytelling that has been most applicable to the transition, the conversion from, call it, Web 2 or traditional modes of storytelling to Web 3 and the metaverse and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Neat. And so, on that tip then, were there any pivotal experiences along the way from traditional storytelling, from traditional filmmaking, from traditional commercials, where, the light bulb for you started to go off, and it was like, hey, this new direction here, the future of the internet, this seems to be like, were there any indications that pursuing that path seemed to be the thing?
Well, I've always wanted, I mean, the goal was always to be in entertainment. I was never headed towards a tech career. I was never, funny enough, I've always been interested in being an entrepreneur and been interested in creating things, the business, be it that too, but much more in a creative way. Creative businesses, creative content. Um, Ultimately, that was it. But the fact that you can do that in this new way and you can engage with people like never before, but also give creators the ability to use these tools that are coming on the blockchain, give them more ways of controlling their income, getting less middlemen involved, and also really being able to hold on to the story and the feedback of others. It lets those people who were always part of this world anyway, hopefully the people who wanted to do this did this for the fans, right? And so when the fans speak back, when the fans speak up and say, oh my gosh, this is what I think, or this is what I think, you're in the different chat rooms, that creates this world where entertainment and stories can be evolving and they can change, and you can, and you've seen certain people do that with, whether in Web 2, call it whatever you want, they've been able to take that feedback and move forward, and change their story based on the way people were accepting it. And ultimately, that gives it back to the community, that gives it back to the fans who you're making it for. And what you're doing is you're creating a platform where those fans can have more ownership in what you're doing. They can be more involved in what you're doing. And you're ultimately making these pieces of content, these creative pieces, together and being able to share in the benefits that they create.
Now, does that change the artistic expression if you're creating something for a community? Is that different than creating? Is it the same thing as creating for yourself, and then that art happens to service a community, or is there a difference between creating for a community and creating specifically for yourself? Or I guess where do those, is this the merger of those two lines, or are those two distinct things?
I mean, that's a really, really good question. Gotta maybe tiptoe around this one. But ultimately, if you think about it, and this is the hardest part for creatives, is to think that there is a business involved with creativity. And in the end of the day, when you are telling stories, the goal is that you're telling it for yourself. But in the end of the day, when you're sharing your voice, when you're sharing your story, you ultimately have something to say, right? That's the place where you're coming from. And if you're saying something, you're saying it to a group of people, to a community, to whether back in the day they were around a campfire, then the newspapers and the radios, then TVs, then films. But you were ultimately always saying it to, if you were entertaining or if you were giving people information, you were giving it to somebody. So if you're saying it for yourself, then you can do that for yourself, to go back to your question, but then you can't expect other people to respond to what you're doing in the way that you probably do want them to. You want, I always remember getting into this. It's like you want to create emotion. You want to get something from somebody else, and you want to give something to those people. That's does that answer your question?
I think so. I think it's it's so much of it is you could say of art then in that paradigm is a shared experience both between the creator and the audience, and
Yeah.
that stuff in the middle is kind of what we could call that's the experience. So maybe it's not so much about the intentionality behind the work, but rather how the work and the audience interact with it.
Yeah, I mean, I come from the place of being collaborative. You know, I've never gotten into this industry to do anything alone, really. Even if you're in the process of writing alone, or if you're editing alone, or if you're, creating these experiences, it is a collaborative effort. Whether it comes to having writers, with producers, with directors, with editors, the idea is that every point of view, once you gather your team, you're going to ultimately, hopefully, listen to the people that you bring into your circle to create these pieces of content. And that's the traditional entertainment aspect of it all. And the idea that you can then open it up, I'm not saying that, there's going to be different versions of what people want to do with these tools, right? It's like you can open it up. You don't have to take everybody's feedback. But the idea of saying, hey, I want to create these worlds, I want to let these worlds live on their own. Take Marvel, for instance. When you start talking about, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or Lord of the Rings, or you could go through any of these pieces, Star Trek. You go to Comic-Con, and these are the people that are dressing up like these characters. It has taken on these role-playing aspects. It's taken on a whole life of its own, really. So it's again, you want to include people, and it's not going to work for everything.
Sure. What do you think? What is it perhaps about NFTs then, and their inclusion into more scripted content that makes them work?
Again, NFTs are, it's such a bigger term of like what it actually is, because to me, an NFT is ultimately like giving value to another person. That's the best way I
Mm-hmm.
explain it. Is it's somebody having something of value that they want to give to somebody else. And the NFT is the representation of that value. And what I mean by that is it's ultimately not the NFT itself, the digital asset, but it's what that NFT holds, which is the utility. It's the things that the experience, the access, the loyalty programs, the memberships, the all of the things that holding an NFT will get you. It's almost like a receipt or an access point. And that's
Mm.
where you're seeing a lot of these projects not succeed, because that's not from the place where they're starting from. They're not starting from a place of value of, past the NFT. They're starting from a place where this is what I'm creating and making, but these things live on. I mean, that's the idea, is that these pieces of art, these assets, these digital keys or programs, they live on. And that's the cool thing about being storytellers and being creatives and creators, because now you start thinking to yourself, okay, well, what's the story? What's the world I can create that far surpasses this literal gate and this gateway that this is giving to you?
Right. And so in many ways it's just a different way. It's a more elevated sandbox in which to tell stories.
Yeah.
So from that place, how does that how do does the concept of NFTs, and how does the uh, adoption of the future of the internet, how does that impact one's ability to tell stories in perhaps a different way than in previous traditional entertainment models?
The first thing it starts with is the community that you're telling it to, I think, and the way you're trying to engage with the audience. That's the number one thing. I mean, ultimately, Web3 is really all about engagement and community, and having direct access to the people you're making these things for. When it's a brand, it's the products and how people interact with the products. When it's a story, it almost lets you throw yourself into a story like never before,
Hmm.
in as much of a way as one wants to be included in that. when it comes to, these in real life events that stories kind of expand into, and other pieces of content, and then you're starting to get into games, and you're starting to get into all of these other ways of interacting with these story elements. That's really, it's been done before, but in a way that's not connected, and that does not give back to the fans, and
Hmm.
that does not include them in the way that the new tools will allow for it. you, you know web 2 was really about the social internet. It was about the way of communicating socially, and on all of these networks, and having your voice heard, and listening to other voices. In this way, you benefit in a greater way, because it's not just about being heard. You're involved, you're benefiting from, you're supporting the entire creation of these stories. And that's the real exciting point. you know it's being able to really have that back and forth with the people that you're creating it for.
Hmm. And so it's almost like the elevated way in which the audience can interact with the stories, with the art, incentivizes creators to put the audience more top of mind when they're creating whatever it is that they're creating.
Exactly.
Which then you could say, traditional art, as we know it, say in film and television, perhaps, do you think, better way of phrasing this is, do you think that there could be less self-serving projects created as more people adopt storytelling where the audience is more a focal point of those stories?
I think, going back to what I said before, I think there are probably certain projects that are better to utilize these tools, and there still are going to be these more, I don't know if self-serving is the word, but these more highly artistic,
Mm.
closed, walled scenarios. There's still going to be a place for those, I think. I don't think we're changing. I don't think we're trying to change or disrupt the way it has been done in the past. I think Web3 and these tools is an additive to everything. I think, besides just giving engagement, and again, it's about looking at it from, there is the creative side, there's the business side. This creates a lot more revenue models for the business side of things. It creates a lot of funding models for the ways that people's stories can be funded and actually created. It creates a lot of distribution models of how things can be distributed. And again, I don't think you're going to completely, it's not going to be an upheaval of how things were completely financed, distributed, written, sold. You have, and again, things are going to, I guess, pivot as it grows, and as people understand how to use the blockchain. What are the benefits of the blockchain? What are the benefits of utilizing a metaverse, whatever that might be to whomever at the current time? It's, to some it's VR, to some it's augmented reality, to some it's just the interconnectivity of the real world, and whether it's digital, or whether it's story, or whether it's what's in the ether. It's just about how we're going to be interconnected with each other, I think, in a different way.
Hmm.
And as storytellers, we're there to guide it. And I mean, ultimately, you're there to create it. And the just to kind of lead into that is, you look at all these things, whether it's the iPhone, it's the iWatch, you have all these pieces that were created by storytellers, right? And then, going back to Star Trek, going back to H.G. Wells, going back to, Philip K. Dick or Neil Stevenson, like all these people who have created these ideas, they're now coming to be. The tech is catching up. And the idea that that's going to change, and people are going to be creating, tech is going to be constantly evolving. And if the two can just work together, the things that can be innovated, I think will be just next level.
Totally. And do you think, has the tech, you mentioned the Apple Watch and the iPhone, has the tech sort of been ahead of the creative in some ways, if you were to think of them, side by side, as over the past, say, decade or so? Has the tech kind of pushed a little further beyond the ways in which stories can be told, and now suddenly there's more of an alignment perhaps in those two areas?
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I mean, if you think about it, the storytellers created the idea of the tech for the tech to ever be created. So if I was actually looking at it from the complete opposite side and saying a lot of these pieces were created by writers, right? And then people who were inspired by the writing created the tech.
Mm.
And the tech has started to expand and the tech has started to grow, but ultimately it's about the imaginative minds of storytellers and creators and creatives who create these ideas that inspire technicians and inspire entrepreneurs to realize what those stories were telling. Does that make sense?
Totally. So in many ways, it's just taking the storytelling, taking stories, taking the storytelling, taking. So in many ways, it's taking stories, taking the storytelling. So in many ways, it's taking storytelling and taking the storytelling format and applying it not just to stories in the traditional sense of film, television, books, etc., but really looking at the stories within the tech that's being created, and and kind of asking what stories is the tech telling based on, as you said, writers, creators. Like what are we, what narratives are being created based on traditional storytelling in a tech environment?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to try and wrap my head around that question. Well, I guess in the end of the day, you have a lot of left brain people, a lot of right brain people, a lot of people who think differently and who create differently. Some people create objects, some people tell stories. And if you can break down the barriers between those different types of thoughts, which I think um, the thing that I've noticed is not a lot of creative people can talk specifically to the tech people and vice versa in a way that the other understands.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is creative people are coming at it from one angle, tech people are coming at it from another angle. Now, if we were able to break down those bridges and really, really huddle those different types of thinkers in the room, just like in television, writers' rooms are filled with much different types of people, getting different voices, different perspectives, and really different true understandings of how a situation can be, so it can be looked at in different ways and unique ways. Now, if you can expand that into a place where it's not just telling a story, but it's engulfing people in this new reality, it's creating situations, it's giving people ownership of those things that they're interested in, and ultimately they're patrons in these things, but then they ultimately become investors in these things in a way that hasn't been done before. Ultimately, looking at the new way of saying, of really being involved in your hobbies and your interests and your stories in a way where you actually have ownership and you're actually helping move this brand or this entity forward. you're going to be much more inclined to be much more invested in those things. You're going to build that community. You're going to get your friends in. You're ultimately going to be, sticking to storytelling. You're ultimately going to become like the best marketing effort for these films, for these shows, for these live events. Because again, the reality, I think, is going to all blend together, where it's, in the end of the day, or in, the way it has been in traditional media, is like you're searching for an end goal. There's
Mm.
a film at the end of the rainbow. That's what your fans are going to go to. And there is a television show that your fans will eventually get to watch. But imagine if, instead of just saying, hey, in 2 years, I'm going to give you this film, or in a year, you're going to see this show that I've been working 3 years to create, you're going to be able to say, okay, cool, here's that film or TV show that's going to come, but I'm going to now start giving you other stories. I'm going to get you involved in this world. I'm going to start creating. We're going to have these types of events that you're going to be able to engage at and with. You're going to be able to ultimately participate in and feel like you're a part of this movement, and not just feel like you're someone being sold to.
Mm. So you're an active, yeah, as you said, you're an active participant. You're actively engaging with, at the end of the day, art, a product that you can also be a patron of. So it's really kind of diversifying the way in which people can interact with art in a way that they haven't ever before, on a, as you're saying, on a much deeper level.
On the creative side, absolutely. But then think about, even on the business side of these creators, being able to, have more ownership on the things that they're creating. So as a creator of a piece of art or a piece of content, you're ultimately you're ultimately giving it away to somebody else in order to have the opportunity to make your art, because somebody has to pay and fund that for you. And then somebody has to say, oh, I accept that, and I'm going to put this on network television or on cable television, or hey, I'm going to distribute this in my film, in my theater, or I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. When now it's going to be really interesting, because if you start getting further into the idea of the business side of things, you're going to be able to, say, hey, here's my art, here's my idea, and you can get it funded. But even imagine if you could sell a TV show as an NFT.
Mm.
And the way that those smart contracts, and again, this stuff isn't being necessarily done right now, but it's the same idea, it's the same concept of selling a television show and being attached to that as a creator and a creative, and having it not necessarily all taken from you in those same ways. It can become more collaborative, and the people who are involved can all be a part of that greater picture and the greater pie, both in the creative but also financially,
Sure.
and make sure that the creators get paid.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting to think about, like, what an NFT TV show looks like. You know, how does that break out? How is it distributed? How do the NFTs themselves play a role in the content that is created? Are they based on characters that are then in the show, future characters, and that impacts new mints and new drops? Like, what is that? I think it's really interesting to even think about it, because from what you're describing too, I mean, the future of that in some ways is happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it a little differently, because, like, yes, the NFTs, you can create a bunch of cats, or you can create a bunch of animated characters, and then those characters can end up in a show, and whoever owns that character can participate in that series. Those are some of the things that are being done. But imagine if you literally had a TV show that you sold to a network as an NFT, and the actual entity of that show had that contract, because ultimately the
Mm.
NFT is based off of, these smart contracts and the blockchain and all of these things that are just a little bit more transparent. So when things are triggered, you the people aren't questioning it because it's part of the smart contract. And I think smart contracts are going to evolve in a way where they really are going to allow creators to, when it comes to the whole like union system, even like getting into all of the unions, getting into all of the ways that money is reported when films make money and TV shows make money. A lot of those numbers aren't necessarily always available to the creators. So you don't know, though. You don't always know
Right.
how your film is doing and whatnot. But that I think in the future will change.
And in terms of these smart contracts, you kind of touched on it prior. Uh, this isn't just something with respect to a TV deal that would be impacted. I mean, we're talking across the board from, each part of the traditional, call it Hollywood contract, branding, licensing. The smart contract has sort of a sea of possible ramifications in a lot of different ways. How do you foresee, the smart contract itself handling some of those wide range of impacted avenues?
I mean, that's the exciting part, right? Because in the past, a graphic designer would get hired to make a logo or make something or an idea, or there's a shirt or there's a hat, and maybe that hat turned into Nike, right? Or a hat, or like something else turned into something bigger than what it was, just, a person, an artist was hired to do. Now imagine if you created this idea, this thing, and then it spawned into merchandise, and it spawned into a bigger business, and it spawned into however many different, revenue models. Like, those smart contracts can hold that person who created it as a part of the, one of the people who benefit from that in whatever way that smart contract was created. So, it's ways to really, again, I think creatives are going to benefit the most from this, because, I don't think the whole system is worked out yet. And I think there's a lot of things, I don't think there's such a thing as an expert in this business right now, because everybody's trying to figure it out. But to be able be to be in a place where you're trying to create and help others make sure that they benefit from their own creations is exciting to me.
Totally. And to that end, with creators, you're saying perhaps benefiting the most, do creatives, storytellers in general have a leg up on the average person trying to figure out the space?
I don't think so, because they're not focused on that. I think that's the key to your, a lot of creatives don't really want to focus on the business aspect, because that does sometimes hinder their creativity. Because when you're focused so much, as a creative, you don't want to focus so much on that end goal or that other things of what you're trying to create in the bigger picture. But the idea is to try, and this goes back to like looking at what agencies are doing, what management companies are doing, what the infrastructure of the entertainment world looks like today, and how they can change to ultimately assist with that. because because I think if creatives got so focused on that, their creative might hurt.
Totally. Do you think then are agencies and management companies going to still have the same trend setting mechanism that they currently do in traditional film and television. And by
Who knows?
trend setting, to elaborate on that, it's, a lot of, you could say, certainly when we were back in agency land, a lot of other companies took their lead from the actions of these bigger agencies and management companies. So if, say, these larger companies are delving into the space and carving out new ways of interacting in those spaces, do you think it's just going to be the same ripple effect where other people are saying, oh, hey, look at what agency X and management Y are doing, let's try to follow suit?
It always is a form of that, isn't it? I think so. I
It
mean,
seems.
well, because they're in a place where they can focus on that because their infrastructure is built that way, and they represent talent. And in the end of the day, their goal different goals for agencies and managers, but their goal is to help build out the universe of their creatives and their creators and their visionaries. And I think it will probably fall in their job category to do that. And that's why you see all these big agencies. CAA is highly invested in Web3 and NFTs and different companies. Like, I think I saw UTA today might have announced their investment in Web3 companies. All of the big agencies are doing it. All the management companies, I know a lot of ones I've talked to are tipping their toes in. And then you look at places like Fox. I believe it's Blockchain Labs is a Fox company that they're wanting to invest $100 million or something like that into these worlds. You have places like MoonPay partnering with Universal and Fox for Hyperminted. All these things are happening, and the funny thing is a lot of people don't know it yet. They don't see it yet, so they say this is all just, again, a blip, or this is all like it's just going to be this thing in the past soon. But I remember when I was at the agency, I remember we got a call from somebody, and this had to be in like 2005 or six, and this person, had said, they just want to create how-to videos. And it sounded like the craziest thing in the world. It's like, who the heck is going to just want to sit there and watch a bunch of how-to videos all the time? Anytime I need to know anything, I look up a how-to video,
Huge market.
right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was hilarious. We thought it was kind of silly and ridiculous. And little do we know, like 15, 16 years later,
How to is a
there you have it.
burgeoning industry. Yeah. From how it used to be that you had to uh you had to purchase How to for Dummies and read that book, whatever category, and then all of a sudden how to videos supplanted that almost overnight.
It's funny.
With with respect to creatives and, the agency trends and everything like that, it sounds like creatives themselves, agencies then just have another avenue to pursue for their clients. The creatives, as you said, the visionaries, in terms of just helping each, if they wanted to, create and mine their own universe and their own world in this new era. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it takes something, I keep saying, I'll go back to Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? You go back and say, Marvel built out this world. And it was guided by, it was guided in a brilliant way. And they built out this world with fan engagement and in a way, I mean, it's almost like a perfect Web3 opportunity if it were, around today. And I'm sure Marvel's working on their whole Web3 strategy. But if you think about everybody individually almost being able to do their own version of that and create these universes, utilize their creative abilities, It's going to go back to the creatives though. It's because it's not everybody is a world builder, and not everybody wants to tell a story that lives on like that, in that sort of a way. And that's where I say, like, look, there's going to be high art, there's going to be, you know, dramas, there's going to be all sorts of different, things and content that will stay in the same world that we all know it, potentially might interact with it differently via blockchain and via purchases and engagement. But when we're talking about the stuff that I really get excited about and interested in is that world building, something way bigger than yourself, and having a place to engage and really being able to be a part of these stories and get obsessed with things and excited. And how do you turn like an adventure in, some of this stuff is already happening, but you have like an adventure in Lord of the Rings. How do you then bring it into like a real life situation? How do you have people interact financially? Like, then you start getting into all these watch to earn, play to earn sort of scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Brushing over that, but that'll be really interesting. Owning data, being able to, I'm kind of going into different areas, but like these are the things that excite me. But movie tickets, music tickets, when you leave, like if they were all NFTs, when you leave, having a way to engage with those properties, film festivals, theater festivals, finding ways where you start thinking about wallets differently and
Mm.
NFTs differently. Imagine if you were going to a film festival and instead of a badge, you got a wallet. And instead of tickets, you got NFTs. Like, how can filmmakers interact with the people as they leave these theaters? How can you engage in a way where it used to just be able to say, yeah, I'm going to go see this movie, and that's, you'll talk about it. But imagine if filmmakers had access to tell you more, to build that out more. That could be really exciting.
Absolutely, and it just makes it, as you're describing it, I'm envisioning all of those different sort of tributaries from the Web3 river, and it's like there's just a lot affecting. There's a lot affected by advancements in the space, and the more you unpack and think about one sector, I mean, we're just on this conversation talking about entertainment, but if you start to build it out, I mean, this is going to have ramifications beyond just entertainment. I mean, you start to think about industry by industry, and then all of a sudden things really start to get a little more complex. Which do you think, because of the communal aspect of a decentralized way of creating and conducting business, does that impact, like, is entertainment going to have perhaps its own, is entertainment going to have its own bubble as it currently exists in the traditional form in in the Web3 world? Like, is that kind of bubble still going to exist in the same way that it does now?
I mean, the people in the bubble probably see it much more as a bubble,
Sure.
but like if you look at any industry, it's all the same. It's the people, it's when you're in an industry, or you're working in an industry, or people in your family are in an industry, it consumes your life, because that's what you're talking about. Your job, you're talking about your work, you're talking about your creations. Film and entertainment is a little different, because your creations become the talk of everybody else around their tables and whatnot. um, but there are going to be, it could literally live on anywhere, probably in the bigger brands and the bigger, IP and that whole world. You're going to see a lot more interactivity and engagement, because the escapism
Mm.
aspect of it is really what it is. It's you're escaping from your daily life with this story from this person who created it, and you're going on this adventure because you want to not think about the day that you just had. You sit down in front of your TV, or you put on your augmented reality goggles, and like, it's gonna be different.
Yeah, no question. And in the same way that I think you alluded to it before, the internet was different, the late 90s, early 2000s, we noticed a shift. And I mean, you remember when internet speeds were a thing of conversation, and I'm sure they still are in some ways, but not back then. It was when you had cable internet, it was moving from dial up to cable was a huge shift that people were talking about, So yeah, it's interesting to think how the transition will continue just on a baseline level, how the new technology will continue to affect and be the source of conversations, aside from entertainment being an outlet, the conversations of what's happening in the space from a technological perspective in the space is also going to be something people will talk about. And in terms of what people are talking about, and well, let's get to what excites you with being a Web3 strategist. What does that encompass? What does your day to day look like? How are you relating professionally to the world? With a background in filmmaking and commercials and stuff like that.
It's funny. It's about having the conversations, the same conversations with a lot of people. Um, you you know who's interested and you know who's not. And I reach out to a lot of.
How do you know?
I start to roll over when I think anybody who is in Web3 or NFTs have mentioned the word NFT and Web3 and metaverse and blockchain how many times in a day, just because you're pumped about it. You're probably an early adopter. You're probably into a visionary futurist, people who think that something's coming and something exciting, and you want to be a part of something, and a part of starting something. Then you talk to a lot of people who are in their day-to-day lives and they're not into that, and they're not really wanting change, or they think change is silly, or they don't think that is the change, or they just can't wrap their heads around what you're talking about. That's usually about 2 minutes or under. And in 2 minutes, if they start asking questions, yeah, then it's a whole different conversation. But I find it really exciting to talk to a lot of people, to go to some of these conferences, to find ways to adapt people who think differently, and kind of take these tools and find ways for making them come around and really understanding how it could benefit them. And I think that's the most exciting thing. And for me, my day to day is just really to talking to as many people as possible, and at first it's getting them to understand what's coming, or seeing my vision of what I believe the future is. And then if there is a connected vision, or if there's a connected thought, then you start going deeper, and then you try and find ways that you can help that person do it. And then you could, whether it's a person in a film or TV project, whether it's a person at a brand, whether it's a musician, if it's, because if you think about it, like, I could probably throw a dart at every industry on the wall and come up with ideas how people can change their industry. But that's what people are spending millions, if not billions of dollars on today. Like all the biggest companies, literally, you got like Apple, Google, Facebook, Meta. Google just partnered with Coinbase to accept crypto for their cloud offerings. All of these companies are doing it behind the scenes. You just don't see it yet if you're not in it.
What do you think the next 6 months to a year, what can we expect? Perhaps, your prediction, well, it's hard to predict because it's all, as you said, happening as we speak. What does the next 6 months to a year in entertainment look like from, an advancement perspective, or where all these technologies that we've been talking about, or the uses of the technologies that we've been talking about? How does it all coalesce? What does it look like? What's the map? If you had to kind of give us your insights there.
Well, I think we are. It's interesting because it takes time to create, and it takes time to adopt and to adapt, and ultimately, I think people are starting to adapt and trying to educate themselves and understand what this is. And the more other brands come in, the more entertainment companies come in. Disney is fully invested, Fox is fully invested, Universal is invested. All of the biggest studios out there are invested in this. Now, being able to see those initiatives and then have them actually act on them. All the agencies are invested very, very fully in a lot of new Web3 tools that people don't even know about today. And to say in the next 6 months, you're probably going to see a lot more announcements of projects, probably a lot of companies that are interested in getting in. Over the next year to 2 years, you're probably going to start seeing projects that people have been working on for 2 years come to fruition. You're probably going to start seeing more of these. You're going to probably see a lot of failed initiatives, but then you're going to start seeing ones that aren't failed. And then the more and more that are not failures, the more and more that do well and bring more revenue streams to creators that allow creators to build worlds in different ways, then they're going to talk to their groups and engagements and then their friends and other creators, and then you're going to start seeing a spread probably of other people wanting to get involved in this type of a world. And then you're going to see places like Starbucks come out with their Odyssey program, which is their new Web3 loyalty program. And you look at places like, you have Gucci and you have these Hugo Boss, all these places getting involved. Fashion is big, but that isn't, I think, as in your face if you're not in one of these big cities like New York, LA, Miami, with that in your face. But the second you start seeing someone like Starbucks become more successful, that's on every corner everywhere, and you start seeing more people adopt through their passport and stamps, which is not even the language that Web3 users are talking about right now, you're going to start seeing people adopting this world where it's just the next evolution and they don't really understand that it's any different. They're benefiting from it, though.
Right.
I do think that you're going to see a lot more of it. Whether or not you're going to know if you haven't been involved is the big question.
Well, it sounds like we'll have to just wait and see. Well, fascinating stuff. This has been another episode of the Lights, Camera, Crypto podcast. Ben Silverman, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.